Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest today is Don Knabe. He is a member of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, and he recently gave a speech. It's the State of the County speech. You give it every year in Long Beach. Well received. I was saying I spoke with Alan Lowenthal, a Democratic member of Congress to be. He was very complimentary. I mean, you got plaudits from both sides of the aisle.
Well, I think, that's a great thing I always like about my job. It's not,
Right.
it's not partisan.
Right.
But more importantly, our mindset is always we have to solve the problems.
Right.
And
You're
that's
a county.
We're a county, but we spoke to the national and state levels have such a great impact on counties, on cities, on school districts, on community college districts. We have to budget, balance our budget each year,
Right.
and they don't. So I spoke about, the need for dialogue on both sides of the aisle. You can't blame either one at this point. You have to blame both.
Do you feel as if the nation is ready to see that dialogue? The leaders of the nation are ready to participate in that dialogue? Because this campaign, look, we follow campaigns. This seemed to be particularly acrimonious.
It was very acrimonious and downright ugly in some
Right.
cases, not only here in California, but in other parts of the country. I think America will be ready, and this is what I hate to see. America will be ready on January 2nd if, in fact, they do not fix this situation.
Right.
With $1.2 trillion worth of cuts and taxes going up all over, I think I'll see probably the first opportunity for a national Proposition 13.
Could you imagine?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some points in your speech. And I want to focus first on Proposition 35. That was the human trafficking initiative. It increased penalties for those engaged in human trafficking. I don't think I've ever seen a proposition get as much support as this one. Was it 86%?
87%.
Yeah, it was a huge victory. And I think in a lot of ways, a huge victory for you. I mean, this has been an issue that has been near and dear to you for decades.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's one of those issues, unfortunately, that everybody thinks about. It's across the pond in a third world nation.
Of
When
course.
it's right.
And it's not.
It's right here in our own backyard.
Right.
Not only in Los Angeles County, but Riverside, San Bernardino, San Diego, with the public transportation the way it is. And the average age of these young girls that are forced into this prostitution is 12 years old. I mean, 12 years old, think about it. So it's an issue that needs to be dealt with. We have a couple of who I call Wonder Women in our probation department that have really taken it on in the last year, and we have dedicated courtrooms now for these girls, multiple services around them, mental health services, housing.
At the same time, many members of boards of supervisors throughout the state have been a little frustrated by the realignment plan, which sends prisoners from state into county jails. So if the one hit I've heard against Prop 35 is, we need to decrease our prison population, ordered by the Supreme Court. If we increase penalties, that means more folks are going to be in prisons. We're already overcrowded. It's going to flow downward. And so are you concerned about that element vis-a-vis realignment?
I'm always concerned about realignment and the number of prisons we have, but you also have to prioritize the volatility of the crime. I mean, the horrific part of these crimes and what they're doing. On the other hand, as it relates to realignment, we've got issues all the way along. We're not getting the reimbursement that we were told to get with the passage of Prop 30 now.
Right, that's good news for realignment,
Well,
no?
good news in the sense that we have a constitutional amendment. I don't think we're going to hold our breath because right now we're getting about 50 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, I heard that in your speech.
So I think that at some point we're going to have to deal with that particular issue. But recently, if you remember here, recently there was those 4 people found murdered
in Northridge.
And right now they think one of the perpetrators is a Prop 109 release.
Oh, really? A realignment release.
Realignment release.
That would, I think, be the first big case, if that's the case.
Yes.
I want to continue on the conversation relating to your speech. And you are one of the individuals that spearheaded a program called Safe Surrender. In so many ways, it has been transformative. And we've reached a milestone in Safe Surrender. I know it makes you incredibly proud. Tell us about it.
Well, it's the program, no name, no shame, no blame, a mother within the first 72 hours of birth, any hospital, any fire station, any police station. And we reached the milestone here recently with 100 saved, and that same day, a matter of hours later, we hit 101. And so we had a little celebration. But when you see these families, not only have we saved 101 lives, we've made 100 families, 101 families very happy. And in addition to that, I always say, you can never forget the courage of the mother who did the right thing for that baby and herself.
And I want to ask you, though, don't get me wrong, 101 lives saved is remarkable. But why isn't it more? I mean, why aren't there more safe surrenders?
Well, I mean, our ultimate goal is, zero deaths,
Of course.
and we're not there yet. But I think what we're seeing now, with the help of the media, with the help
Right.
of advertising, all these other entities that are working with it, people are starting to understand that they have an option.
I hope so.
And we just want it to go on forever.
Right, and I'm sure it will. Also, in your speech, you discussed transportation. And one of the frustrating things for Angelinos throughout the basin is there's no public transportation to LAX. We don't, or no direct transportation to
We can
LAX.
get there.
We can get there. Well, that's the hope, that's the goal. For better or for worse, I know you were an opponent of Measure J. That went down, which would have extended the sales tax for 30 more years. And some could have argued that could have helped to connect LAX throughout the basin. But be that as it may, where do we stand?
Well, first of all, I'll just speak to that argument.
Please.
If it would have helped, I might have supported Measure J, but it would not have helped.
Tell me why.
Because it didn't expedite it by maybe a year or two. My point is that every time we go to Washington to ask money, dollars for our construction programs, for our transportation programs, they say, when are you guys going to get a connection to LAX?
Yeah.
We stopped it with the green line right on the fringe. We traded that last leg into LAX for the first leg of the red line, for better, for worse. So I recently brought in a motion in front of the Metro Board to say,
And you're
hey,
on
look,
that board.
I'm on that board, to say, hey, look we need to expedite this connection. We need the Crenshaw connection. We need the LAX connection.
Crenshaw's going, no?
Yeah, well, it's going, but we need to keep that on track so there's not a run
I understand.
on those connections for the west side subway to the sea. So the point being is that we deal with all these multiple things. We need to concentrate on that. We also need to think about Burbank and Long Beach.
Of course. Supervisor, I do want to ask you, though, about this recent election and how that will impact transportation. We know that President Obama has been a big fan of infrastructure projects, part of the stimulus package early in the first term, funded infrastructure, whether we support that or not, I'm not saying, it just is. So now that he has been reelected, is that good news for infrastructure projects, and let's be parochial, in California?
I would hope so, and I say it in this way. The problem we're always going to have is the focus of the White House for the last couple of years on infrastructure, transportation has been high-speed rail.
Right.
We have many more shovel-ready projects here in the state of California for transportation issues, decongestion issues, kinds of things where we can make things better. I would hope that the concentration, they free up some of those high-speed rail dollars if they're not going to complete a project and put them into the infrastructure. But our delegation needs to be together. It's not a Republican or Democrat issue. Where we always get spanked back there is these other delegations, regardless of parties, stick together to get their hunks of money. That's going to be critical here in California.
But here's an interesting challenge. In California, 3 Republican incumbents were defeated. We now have a delegation, I think it's 38 Democrats, 15 Republicans, and yet it's the Republicans that are in the majority, and we have a small number of Republicans going to Washington, D.C. So this is a tough balance for the California
Absolutely.
delegation.
But the voters have spoken, so we're going to have to deal with it, and it's going to be very difficult.
Right.
You're absolutely right. I mean, now where we've lost in some areas, at least Congressman Ed Royce maintains part of LA County, and
he's now chair of, is it Foreign Affairs?
Foreign Affairs.
Which hasn't necessarily helped for transportation, but he's in leadership.
Helps human trafficking. Big issue there.
Ding, ding, yeah.
But on transportation, it is going to be a fight. But that's where everybody has to stay together, and that's where we talked early on about the communications across the aisle, because the Republicans that are in the minority, even in California as it relates, have to know the importance of transportation projects to their district and to this state.
But, I mean, it's such a dicey situation for the Republican Party here in California.
Well, you're always up. It's, what do they call it, the ABC, anybody but California. And we're so far away from the Beltway. Literally, and everything we do is a dogfight. Just because this is big behemoth, a state of California, you want everything, and you have your earthquake, floods, and fires, and all those kinds of things.
Right.
And we do, but it's always a dogfight to get we're a donor state.
I know.
And the conversation, we give out more than we get back.
His name is Don Knabe. He is a supervisor in Los Angeles County. When we come back, we'll be speaking with the chief of police in Signal Hill about a new police station that just opened in that city, or is about to open.
About to open.
About to open. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition.
Thanks, man.
Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Mike Langston. He is the Chief of Police of Signal Hill, California, which is where?
Well, Signal Hill is in the southeast portion of Los Angeles County. Signal Hill is one of a few very unique cities in that it is completely surrounded by a much larger city, in this particular case, the city of Long Beach.
And the history of Signal Hill is, I know the answer, but why don't you tell us how Signal Hill became a donut in the middle of Long Beach?
It is a very interesting story. Signal Hill was famous for oil production,
Yes.
and the founding fathers found a multitude of oil.
Yes, they did.
And back in the early 1900s, there was an interest in taxing that oil. And the founding fathers said, we don't want to be taxed by the city of Long Beach, so they incorporated in 1924 as an independent city.
And they've been successful ever since. What's interesting about cities that tend to be smaller is often they will contract out their public safety services with the county, for example.
Right.
Signal Hill hasn't done that, obviously. You're sitting in my chair.
Right.
What's the history of that, if you know?
Well, there's an interesting story there, too.
Please.
The city incorporated in 1924, established a police department at that time, and somewhere back, and I want to say the 80s, I believe it was, the city did contract out for police services with the county of Los Angeles. And there was kind of an uprising with the citizenry,
Right.
and I believe they ousted some council members and said we want our independent police department back, and it was back relatively quickly thereafter and has been there since.
And so you are actually new to Signal Hill. You joined as chief in May 2011. We congratulate you
Thank you.
on your new position. What brought you to this beautiful city?
Well, it's just a great opportunity to work in Southern California. I've long admired the city of Signal Hill. As you indicated, it's a great city.
It is.
It has a great history. It's doing exceptionally well.
What's amazing about it is, what is it, 2.5 square miles?
2.5 square miles.
And within that 2.5 square miles, you have your oil fields, of course, but you have a tremendous amount of commerce. I mean, big malls and beautiful homes. And
Right. Well, that goes back to the incorporation of the city back in the early 1900s. The county, because of the oil tax that the city had, said, look, when you incorporate, you're not going to get significant property tax revenues. So Signal Hill is a low property tax city.
Interesting.
Gets just a few pennies on the dollar from every dollar that the property owners pay. The rest goes to the county and the state, wherever it goes to. So the elected officials and the city management realized that they had to bring in the type of businesses that
Sales
would
tax.
generate tax,
Sales tax, right.
So in this small city, you're right, we have a very successful auto mall.
Right.
We have a couple of Home Depots and retail centers, and the city's been very successful in that regards.
the city, some would say surprisingly, even though it's small, had a redevelopment agency before redevelopment was eliminated. That's a whole other conversation.
It is.
But the good news for the Signal Hill Police Department is the redevelopment agency was able to work diligently to, I guess, was it cobble some property together or cobble the funds together to build a new police station? Is that right?
Correct. They cobbled together the funds to build a police station
Right.
through a tax
Allocation.
tax allocation bond, and that's how the new station is funded. They purchased the property. The purchase of that property is another story as
Right.
well. There's an interesting story
Go.
behind that.
I like stories.
Well, the property is centrally located in the city, and because of the oil production at one time in the early 1900s, that property was subdivided into 7,000 separate lots. And I don't know, I forget the overall dimensions, but it's a standard commercial lot
Right.
that was subdivided into 7,000 lots. So they had to engage the process of trying to find all those owners and so forth. It was a very complex process to eventually gain title to that property.
And sure enough, it happened. And here's the good news. In November of 2010, construction began, and there was a short halt in construction. A story behind that?
Construction started in November of 2010, was supposed to be done in February, March of this year. There was a little hiccup with the original contractor, and anybody that's built something can
It's
probably
inevitable.
appreciate this. The original contractor left the job, and because the project was properly bonded, The bond company stepped in, brought a new construction company.
You would never
in.
think that a city project of that magnitude could actually have a contractor skip out, but whatever, be that as it may.
Things happen.
So the good news is in early 2013, the new station will open.
That's correct. We have an anticipated
Right.
date of January 29th.
So tell us about this station, because in so many ways it is state of the art for a variety of reasons, be it environmentally, be it communications-wise, emergency-wise, just a lot of great things.
Well, the first and most important aspect is that it's now big enough to accommodate our needs and the community
Before?
needs. The current facility is about 13,000 feet, and for example, our records department, we have 6 employees in there, and there's really enough space for 2 workstations. We don't even have enough workstations for all of them to be on the computer at the same time. So you can see that we're missing some efficiency
No doubt.
and ability to conduct our work. So the new Records Bureau is 3 times, 4 times larger.
The station's 21,500 square feet.
Correct.
So it's almost 8,000, over 8,000 square feet larger than the current facility. So there's the size differential. Tell us about the environmental elements, because those are exciting.
Yeah. In effect, it's a green building.
Right.
It meets LEED certification. LEED means leadership in
Environmental,
environment and design.
energy.
Environmental design. I have it written here.
It's okay,
Leadership
yeah.
in energy and environmental design.
Nice.
Green building.
Nice.
So it's built with energy efficient systems like windows and doors, heating and air conditioning. It has a very significant solar presence that will.
Tell us more, because that's kind of cool.
We have 2 carports that cover where our command post vehicle is parked and where our police vehicles are parked. They both have solar panels on top. It'll produce, we believe, about 1/3 of our energy needs, hopefully. It's a pretty big facility.
So it could produce the energy you need for daylight hours, for example.
Absolutely. During the daylight hours, it'll certainly cover.
I mean, that's a cost
our
savings for the
energy.
city, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, we live in the Los Angeles basin. There's always concerns, I don't want to be alarmist, but about Mother Nature wreaking
Right.
havoc. You know,
Right.
not far from the port, we have earthquakes.
Right.
Talk to us about your emergency operations center.
Well, this is an essential services building, which basically means it was designed to withstand earthquakes, fire, flood, winds, to be there after a natural disaster or
Right.
some similar event to serve the community. And so it's a well-built building, and we have our new emergency operations center that's designed to basically go into operations within a matter of minutes and to start serving our community or any community that has that particular need.
Now, presumably, even though Signal Hill is small and landlocked, let's call it, there could be growth in the
Absolutely.
city as well. And so I'm wondering if the building was constructed in a way, or the land allows for further expansion if you need to expand, to avoid having to start over
Right.
and then pick up again.
Absolutely. Certainly there's already built-in aspects that we can grow into as far as the locker rooms and so forth. They're designed for many more employees than we currently have. But the building itself, on the north end of the building, the land at that end of the building has already been compacted and prepared for construction should the need eventually arise to add on to the building. And so certainly it's a building that we anticipate will be here to serve this community for the next 100 years.
Congratulations, congratulations. As we conclude, sir, I want to ask you about crime rates. I've spoken with many people in law enforcement, and one thing that has really surprised me, quite astonishing, is that during this economic downturn, as a general proposition, crime rates have dropped.
Correct.
Usually they do the opposite. How do we see crime growing or dropping in the Signal Hill, Long Beach area, let's say?
Well, across the United States, in fact, in California has not been an exception to that. Crime has declined in the last
Right.
several years, actually to an all-time low in some cases.
Sure.
That's been the case in Signal Hill and Long Beach. We have started to see a slight uptick in certain crimes, property crimes and so forth. It's hard to really put a finger on that and say if that's
Right.
if there's a specific cause of that, whether it be the economy or what have you,
Right.
but there has been a slight increase in property crimes in both our community, and I
Right.
know the same is true in Long Beach.
He is the chief of police for Signal Hill. His name is Mike Langston. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you for watching Charter California Edition. Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. I'm so glad you're with us. I want to introduce you to Joe Mozingo. He is a reporter for the Los Angeles Times, and in 2010, he wrote a 3-part series about his family, specifically focusing on the last name Mozingo, and that series led to this book, The Fiddler on Pantico Run. I have read almost all of it. I admit I haven't finished it yet, but I am fascinated by his family story. Joe, thanks for joining us on California Edition.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about the name Mozingo and how that name took you on a journey.
Well, I had this name Mozingo. People always ask me about it. Well, where's that name from? And my family always said they thought it was Italian.
Sounds Italian.
Yeah, it sounds
Mozingo.
Italian.
Maybe
And-
Portuguese.
Yeah, exactly. But it was later as a teenager that it started to seem weird that they didn't say we are Italian.
Right.
So we think it's Italian. And then at some point we just became Basque because my dad heard some rumor that it was Basque.
Spanish.
So, yeah.
Right.
So our lineage was very unmoored. Then I got into grad school and I met a professor whose last name was Mozingo, and she was black. And she told me that
Ruh-roh.
she went to a family reunion in North Carolina, and there were whispers that the name was actually African, and that all Mozingos in America descended from this African man who came to Virginia.
I would literally become unglued. I would become so excited to hear that. And so the good news is, as a reporter, myself as well, we delve, we dig,
Yeah.
we investigate. And so you took off.
Yeah, now I had a story. That's something
Exactly.
to look into. Yeah.
So talk to me about your journey, because I was hooked by your 3-part series. I was so hooked, I emailed him. I stalked you. And apparently 700 other people also emailed you.
Yeah.
Over 1 million people viewed the story online. You knew you were onto something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely resonates with people, I think, because in America, I mean, it's hard. It's still hard for even the most open-minded person to get over the idea of a black family turning white, when it's so much easier to conceptualize white family turning black. Look at Obama, he has a white mother and he's considered black, but the opposite never.
And what you found, I don't want to give away too much of the ending because this book is worthy of a read, I'm telling you, is that you descend from an individual named Edward Mozingo. Tell us about him, how he got to America, and why his early arrival allowed for Joe Mozingo to look like he does today.
All right, well, he was taken as a slave from Africa, most likely from Angola near the Congo River. At that time, England had just started its colony in Virginia, so it was a brutal place. People usually lasted 3 to 5 years before dying of some disease or Indian attack.
This is the Jamestown era.
Yeah, I mean, London called Jamestown a slaughterhouse. They were trying to drag orphans there. So they finally got these slaves started trickling in from the Caribbean where the real plantations were.
Sure.
And so by the time he arrived in 1644, there were only 50 or so Africans. And there was no point to having a lifelong slave since everyone died in a few years anyway. So they basically treated them like the poor Irish and English, indentured servants, and that's what he was.
And so ultimately, because he wasn't sold into slavery, he was able to petition for his freedom?
Yeah, he must have had a contract. We haven't found the contract, but we did find that when he won his freedom, it said he had an agreement with his master that he would serve, and after 28 years, he is now free in 1672.
Now, why did he get to keep his name Mozingo? Because most slaves, as we know it, wound up being Johnsons or whatever it may be. Was it just, it was so early in the institution?
It's the big mystery. It could have been because he came from Angola. In Angola, there was the Portuguese were there heavily. He could have been literate and Christian already. And they did afford more rights to Africans that were Christian. So he could have, could have just been smart enough to know to demand to keep his name.
Now, what's interesting about Edward Mozingo is who's his spouse?
Yeah, well, this
Who's
is
his
another
spouse?
thing you don't really learn in American history in elementary school. Is there was this period before, in the late 1600s, where poor black and white people were marrying, and they were friends. They'd go drinking and gambling together. They'd run off from their masters together, and they'd get married. So
Edward Mozingo's wife, your 10th great grandmother?
Yeah, I think so. 10th great grandmother
was a white woman.
Yeah, an English woman.
And so that is how we now know there are about 5,000 individuals with the last name Mozingo living in America. why there are some white lines and some black lines.
And mostly white. Yeah.
Mostly white lines. Okay, so talk to me though about the travels that you engaged in writing the series and the book, because I have to tell you, there were points when I was reading this book where I was literally on the verge of tears, and I'm not a crier, because of the way that your metaphoric cousins were treated as biracial individuals as recently as the 20th century.
Yeah, they were, I mean, throughout the 1800s, they were completely marginalized. These were the lines that didn't cross the color line, and they, you know, some were sold back into slavery. The free blacks were considered a refuse species.
Right.
I mean, it was just terrible. They couldn't get jobs. The poor whites didn't want them to take their jobs. So, you know, they had this long, horrible history going all the way up into the 20th century, where the Mozingos I met, Wiley Mozingo, he was one of the first to integrate his high school in the 60s, and everyone was calling him the N-word and throwing things at him.
And didn't Wiley have siblings that, quote, passed?
Yeah, and then his other, so this was a family, they were, you know, the grandfather told the dad, if you marry a dark-skinned woman, I will disown you. I mean, there's
that paper bag test that we hear about. You want to be lighter than the paper
within
bag.
that mixed race culture, you wanted to be light. And so their kids came out every different color. I mean, so Wiley was very black. He was one of the oldest. The youngest was really white. I mean, when I met him,
you would not have known.
Whiter than me. He looked like a good old boy. Yeah,
right. You would not have known.
Yeah, and he was beaten up by the black kids when he was in school. But they lived a really raw life.
So what did this journey do for you? Because it's one that so few people get to take, and I can only imagine traveling through Pantico, which is in Northern Virginia, traveling through North Carolina. I mean, it had to have changed your perspective on who you are, who America is.
Yeah, I mean, first it kind of breaks down the barriers we all have in our mind between black and white, tracing this one family, seeing how fluid race can change with family turning white, black to white, and now turning black again in some cases, and to feel this connection to this black ancestor, which I did after studying and just dreaming and reading about him so much, Edward Mozingo.
Don't you wish you could meet him?
Yeah, I mean, you really feel this kind of almost protective about him, because so many Mozingos, the white Mozingos, they don't want to embrace this at all.
And that's also what I wanted to ask you. What has the response been when you reveal to your direct family, your more distant family, to quote black Mozingos, that you all descend from this patriarch that came here in 1644?
Well, the irony is that the grandchildren that Edward had, started to pass as white, but they were poor white trash, for lack of a better word. I mean, they had no standing, they had no land, they had a funny last name, and they've kind of remained poor throughout the centuries. I mean, so that initial burden is still on them. And they live in the South or the lower Midwest, and they grew up through Jim Crow and this whole, concept of white superiority. And they are absolutely, I shouldn't say all of them, but many of them are absolutely unwilling to accept this. Their fathers were in the KKK. Their great-great-grandfathers fought on the Confederate side in the Civil War. I mean, here they have this Bantu last name,
and you have told them this.
I told them.
By the way, your 10th great-grandfather was an Angolan slave from Africa.
Yeah, and your last name is African, and you're in the KKK.
Response?
Their response is denial. I thought they'd get really mad, but it was more just, no, not true, can't be true.
So is the research done?
Pretty much. If I get
any more to find?
There's some links I'm still looking for, but I think it's done for now.
I have to tell you, I have so enjoyed reading the book. I promise I will finish it. It is worthy of a read, and thank you.
There's a good twist at the end.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait. Thank you for bringing this story, because I think in a lot of ways it does say a lot about us as Americans and the American experience.
Yeah.
Okay, his name is Joe Mozingo. He is the author of this book, The Fiddler on Pantico Run. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you for watching California.